The year 2025 opened under a thick cloud of international trade tensions. Agreements once considered the bedrock of globalization are now under constant strain, and tariffs have evolved beyond mere financial tools. They've become strategic weapons in the hands of global superpowers. Caught in the eye of this storm is Ford, a century-old icon of American industry, where every tremor is magnified into a full-blown economic and political earthquake. The Trump administration's decision to impose a 25% tariff on imported light trucks set off a fierce chain reaction. For Ford, the $1.5 billion in added costs didn't just shake up its financial statements. It forced the company to revise its profit forecasts and raise prices on vehicles manufactured in Mexico, a market that had long been a crucial link in its North American supply chain. These changes spread quickly, putting pressure on a wide network of distributors, dealers, and ultimately American consumers. But the blows didn't stop there. China, once a market Ford had pinned high hopes on, hit back with a 145% tariff on some of Ford's key models, effectively shutting the door on any meaningful entry. For a global company, losing a strategic market like China isn't just a revenue hit, it's a serious crack in its global competitive position. None of this is happening in a vacuum. These developments reflect a power struggle that goes far beyond the auto industry, a clash of economic visions, a fight for control over production, and a question of whether the U.S. can truly reverse the decades-long trend of offshoring. Behind the tariffs lie deeper political calculations: revitalizing domestic industry, protecting jobs, and maintaining a technological edge. At a systemic level, this is also a brutal stress test for the resilience of global supply chains, finely tuned over decades based on the principles of free trade. One broken link can drag down many others, sending shockwaves through the entire structure. And the biggest question still hangs in the air. Will this tariff strategy really bring jobs back home, or will it accidentally sow the seeds of dangerous fractures in the global trade system? To find the answer, we need to dig deeper into America's tariff strategy and understand how it's directly impacting Ford and the entire automotive industry. This journey will go beyond numbers and policies. It's a window into the power dynamics that are reshaping the global economic order. Donald Trump returned to the White House with a bold message. Made in USA isn't just a slogan, it's going to be a governing principle. In his vision, America has lost far too many manufacturing jobs to Mexico, China, and a host of other countries over decades of globalization. And to reverse that flow, he's wielding tariffs as both a political and economic lever, forcing corporations to bring factories back to American soil. The motive isn't new, but Trump's execution is direct and aggressive enough to shake the entire North American auto supply chain. Ford, an emblem of American industry, suddenly found itself at the center of the game. The 25% tariff on imported light trucks wasn't just a number on paper, it became a towering tax wall overnight, blocking shipments from Mexico, where Ford had poured billions into building key strategic models. The fallout was immediate. Within weeks, Ford was saddled with an extra $1.5 billion in costs, forcing profit forecast revisions, price hikes, and a looming threat of losing market share to competitors. At the same time, parts suppliers in Mexico, reliant on Ford's steady stream of orders, were thrown into uncertainty. The strain rippled across U.S. dealerships, where higher prices made customers hesitate and inventories began piling up. And it wasn't just Ford scrambling. GM was forced to delay a $4 billion stock buyback and lower its earnings outlook, while Stellantis, facing both cost pressure and political heat, decided to shift part of its production from Mexico back to the U.S. On paper, it was a public relations win for the Trump administration. Factories reopening, American workers back on the job. But behind the media spotlight, the real cost was massive investments, broken production systems optimized over decades, and a supply chain teetering on imbalance. The ripple effects weren't confined to big manufacturers. Parts suppliers, from braking systems and transmissions to onboard software that ran on razor-tight delivery schedules, were thrown into chaos. A factory missing just one chip or battery module could grind the entire assembly line to a halt. That means even with the goal of protecting industry, a single disruption could cost tens of millions of dollars in just a few days. And for American consumers, the very people this strategy was meant to protect, the reality is harsh. Vehicles built domestically aren't necessarily cheaper. In fact, they can cost even more, since imported raw materials and components are now caught in the tariff storm. Meanwhile, some of America's key export markets are starting to pull back. If US products become pricier and less competitive, buyers abroad will begin looking elsewhere. Yet geopolitically, the message from Washington is crystal clear. If you want access to the US market, you have to play by the new rules. Manufacture on American soil, hire American labor, pay American taxes. It's both an invitation and a warning, and many trade partners understand this isn't a temporary policy shift. It's a strategic realignment where the US is prioritizing economic sovereignty over the old rules of free trade. Still, international trade has never been a one-player game. Once the US makes its move with tariffs, rivals and even allies will have counter-moves of their own. In a world where supply chains are as interwoven as a global nervous system, a hit to one link sends shockwaves through the entire web. The issue here isn't just Ford or even the American auto industry. It's the entire battlefield of global commerce, where players from China to the EU, from Canada to Mexico, are preparing their own responses. And this story won't be told just through dry statistics. It will unfold through diplomatic statements, new tariff barriers, and challenged trade agreements, all redrawing the global trade map in ways few could have imagined just a few years ago. The tariff shockwave from Washington quickly rippled across the globe, and like every major trade conflict in history, the response from partners was anything but gentle. China struck back the hardest. Within days, Beijing slapped tariffs of up to 145% on several of Ford's flagship models, pushing their prices far beyond reach for most Chinese consumers. Their message was crystal clear. If the US wants to build walls, China can build them even higher. For Ford, this was practically a trade blockade, slamming shut one of the most important gateways into the world's largest car market. The European Union took a more cautious yet equally firm stance. Brussels issued a clear warning. If the US extends tariffs to EU-made vehicles and auto parts, there will be a proportional response. Behind closed doors, trade ministers in Berlin, Paris, and Brussels rushed into meetings, searching for a solution that could protect Europe's automotive industry without igniting an endless cycle of retaliation. Tensions were no lighter in North America. Canada and Mexico, the two remaining pillars of the USMCA bloc, began voicing concerns that the foundation of the agreement was starting to erode. For decades, the auto supply chain across the three countries operated like one massive cross-border factory. An engine might be assembled in Ontario, the chassis welded in Michigan, and the final vehicle rolled off the line in Mexico before being shipped back to the US. Now, every new tariff barrier threatens that optimization, inflating costs and dragging out production timelines. The risk of losing thousands of jobs and billions in exports is no longer a distant forecast. It's an immediate concern. This disruption has triggered a new trend that analysts are calling the dual-track supply chain. Corporations are now being forced to maintain separate production networks, one tailored for the US market and another for the rest of the world. It's a strategy that reduces political risk, but sacrifices the economic efficiency of scale that globalization has relied on for decades. This fragmentation won't stop at autos. It's set to spill into electronics, energy, consumer goods, and more. Inside the boardrooms of multinational corporations, strategy chiefs are now redrawing their entire production maps. No one can say for sure whether a factory in Mexico or Canada today won't become tomorrow's weak spot under tariff fire. And in a world where countries are increasingly willing to use trade as a political weapon, the battlefield is only getting hotter and harder to predict. Yet there's one sector that's especially vulnerable, where every shift in tariffs hits like a gale force wind against a ship still under construction: electric vehicles and emerging technologies. In this arena, supply chains aren't just global. They're deeply reliant on exclusive sources, many of them in Asia. If the tariff storm reaches this sector, the consequences will extend far beyond corporate profits. They'll shake the very future of the auto industry in the era of green transformation. Electric vehicles, the great hope expected to lead the auto industry into a new era, are ironically the most vulnerable sector in the face of tariff storms. Unlike traditional gas-powered cars, the value of an EV lies in components that the US has little control over: lithium-ion batteries, semiconductors, electric motors, sensors, and intelligent control systems. Most of these critical parts are manufactured in Asia, particularly in China, South Korea, and Japan. If even one link in this supply chain is hit with a tariff, entire production plans can be thrown into disarray. When battery import costs rise, it's not just the final vehicle price that climbs. New model launches also get delayed. And in the EV market, every month of delay means losing ground in the race for market share, a gap that competitors, especially Chinese automakers, are quick to exploit. Some U.S. manufacturers have even begun reconsidering or postponing investments in affordable EV models, as the cost gap with gasoline vehicles suddenly widens. But the impact of these trade barriers goes far beyond just selling cars. They ripple through America's entire green transition strategy. Plans to roll out hundreds of thousands of charging stations across the country, heavily dependent on imported equipment and components, now face the risk of delays. And when infrastructure lags, consumers grow hesitant to adopt EVs, creating a vicious cycle that worries both the government and the industry. From a global competition standpoint, this is a major risk. Europe is still pressing forward aggressively with its transition, while China has surged ahead in both production scale and cost efficiency. If the US slows itself down, it's not just the auto industry that loses ground. America's technological leadership and global economic influence could also be at stake. In the EV race, the first movers set the standards, dominate the supply chains, and secure long-term profits. And yet, this is the paradox at the heart of protectionist policy. Tariffs might safeguard domestic industry, preserve jobs, and spur local investment in the short term, but they also raise costs and slow down innovation, two critical factors in fast-evolving sectors like EVs. In congressional debates, a growing divide is emerging. On one side, those insisting on protecting American workers at all costs. On the other, those warning that if the US pushes too far, it risks falling behind in the global tech race. And this isn't just a story of factories and lab innovations, it touches real communities and real lives, all caught in the crosswinds of this economic shift. Every tariff, every relocation decision leaves a lasting mark on the social fabric, investment flows, and the fate of millions of workers, both in the US and around the world. In the industrial towns of Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana, places once alive with the clang of steel presses and the whistle of factory shifts, hope is beginning to stir again. After years of watching plants shut down, assembly lines dismantled, and workers forced to leave home in search of jobs, the news of new tariffs has led many to believe that the era of Made in USA might actually return. Small roadside diners and long-standing repair shops are buzzing with talk. Someone mentions a promise to reopen the factory. Someone else points to a new hiring notice posted on the plant gate. But amid the hope, there's still a lingering sense of skepticism, because this isn't the first time they've heard such promises, and more than once it's all flared up briefly before fading away. Across the border in the industrial zones of Mexico and Canada, the mood is far more somber. Production lines that once ran 3 shifts are now slowing down, some even grinding to a halt. Workers worry about their future as orders from the US drop sharply. Neighborhoods once filled with the sound of children playing and cars coming and going have grown eerily quiet. America's powerful auto union, the UAW, supports the tariffs, arguing that protecting domestic jobs must come first. In contrast, Canadian labor unions are pushing back hard, claiming these policies are dismantling the job stability they've spent years building. The financial markets haven't stayed quiet either. Auto stocks have taken sharp hits, even when quarterly earnings meet or exceed expectations, simply because investors are spooked by long-term policy risks. International investment funds are beginning to pause or pull back from expansion projects in North America, redirecting capital to more stable markets. Many corporations are being forced to shift strategy. Rather than going global, they're reallocating resources toward domestic factories, which often means lower productivity and higher operating costs. History has seen these cycles of protectionism before. from the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of the 1930s to the steel and textile import restrictions of the 1970s and 80s, the U.S. has repeatedly raised trade barriers to protect its domestic industries. And time after time, those early wins have turned into long-term losses, as sheltered industries lose the drive to innovate while foreign competitors adapt more quickly. That lesson remains just as relevant today, especially in an era of globalization where capital, technology, and markets move faster than ever before. Behind the statistics, the job numbers, production volumes, and investment figures, lie the lives of millions of people. They are the American workers, thrilled to be called back after years of unemployment. They are the Mexican families rethinking every peso as their income grows uncertain. They are the Canadian engineers, weighing whether to stay for lower pay or leave the industry entirely. All of them are being swept up in a wave of policy decisions they cannot control, but feel every day in their wallets and in their homes. And this is where the story of tariffs transcends the realm of economic headlines and political debates. It becomes a story of society, of belief, of the fabric that holds communities together. Because without a smart and sustainable long-term strategy, today's promises of jobs could just be short-lived waves, crashing, then receding, leaving behind a sea once again flat and cold. In the bigger picture, the future of protectionist policy won't be decided solely by GDP figures or trade balances, but by the answer to a far simpler question: does it truly build a solid foundation for workers and for society? No one can say for sure what will happen in the coming months, but based on what we've already seen, three major scenarios are beginning to take shape. In the worst-case scenario, the U.S. decides to escalate fully, expanding tariffs not just on finished vehicles, but also on key components for both electric and traditional cars. In response, trade partners from China, the EU, to Canada and Mexico unleash strong countermeasures. North America's already strained auto supply chain is pushed to the breaking point. Production slumps, factories are forced to pause operations, and the regional economy slips into a localized recession. The very industrial regions that had hoped for a revival fall silent once more, while the global market reels from a chaotic restructuring. The second scenario offers a more controlled adjustment. The U.S. retains tariffs in select strategic sectors to maintain leverage in negotiations, but reaches agreements with Canada and Mexico to safeguard essential supply chains. This softens the blow to production, preserves jobs across all three countries, and still allows the Trump administration to reinforce its domestic-first message. The market doesn't return to normal overnight, but it avoids a full-scale shock. The third and most ambitious scenario envisions a strategic compromise, where all sides make concessions to build a new trade framework that blends domestic production incentives with selective openness. It's the hardest path, requiring trust and patience, but if achieved, it could establish a new equilibrium, one that protects national interests while preserving global trade flows. In that case, the auto industry wouldn't just escape crisis. It would have a chance to rebuild in a more sustainable and innovative direction. Whichever path unfolds, one thing is certain: the 2025 auto tariff battle will mark a defining chapter in the history of global trade. This isn't just about Ford, GM, or any one car maker. It's a test of whether national interest can coexist with the adaptability demanded by globalization. In a world growing more uncertain by the day, vision matters more than reaction. Those who can look further ahead and prepare for disruption will be the ones who shape the future of this industry and possibly the global trade order itself. If you have thoughts, questions, or personal experiences related to this topic, feel free to share them in the comments below. Every perspective is a valuable piece of the puzzle that helps us see the bigger picture more clearly. And if you'd like to keep following in-depth analysis and the stories behind today's economic and political shifts, don't forget to subscribe, because the world is changing every day, and sometimes a single decision today can shake the future.